so it's looking pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Distract myself from my chair. Ooh, that's good. Marginator is almost entirely hidden. We're recording and we will not go to sleep accidentally. Oh, now the camera's on. It's time to pull my pants.
There, you look good, man. Got a nice sweater on.
Thank you.
There we go.
Okay, so it is again the 18th. We did a podcast earlier today.
Yes.
On Israel-Palestine.
That's right.
Where I erred heinously and mistook I called the 6-Day War the 7-Day War, and I put it in 1969 as opposed to 1967.
That's okay. It happens, man.
So, moment of apology and silence for all those out there who are deeply confused.
Gabriel!
I hope that that error doesn't change the conclusions that people draw from that particular.
I'm sure it'll be okay.
Too drastically. All right, buddy. So we are back at it again.
We are back.
Did I do the date and everything?
Yeah, you did.
Killer.
February 18th. 7:50 p.m.
And what did you want to talk about?
Today we're going to talk a little bit about your ideas around communication, talking to people in general, and hopefully get into what you're doing for your solo project right now.
Exactly. So you thought you wanted to do this one after the Israel-Palestine one.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, in part because we talked a lot about how to have a conversation with people, how to kind of ensure that you're actually communicating or having a real disagreement, rather than a bunch of sort of rehashed ideological positions that keep getting thrown around. That was in reference to Israel-Palestine. I thought we talk a lot about, different ways to communicate with people, different ways to think about communicating people more generally. Mm-hmm. Maybe from our conversation on Israel and Palestine, we could go into that territory about just talking about, like, you thought a lot about, and you do think a lot about communication and how to communicate with people. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts about that, just thinking as a kind of big concept of this idea of communication and what it means to you.
Totally, thank you. So, to start with, I think the most appropriate thing to do is for me to just ask you a couple questions, and we'll try and set up a little bit of groundwork.
Sure.
We've talked before. We've talked actually politics.
Yeah.
In high school has come up a couple times at least.
That's right, yeah.
In different episodes.
Shout out to Mr. Blair.
Shout out to Mr. Blair. Shout out to Brian Blair.
Shout out to B-Man.
But I did another class with him, and I think you were there too.
Yeah, philosophy.
Philosophy.
That's right.
Was that your first big introduction to philosophy?
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah, I read a bit of philosophy before that, but not really studied it.
Had you done anything else really at all before that, or
not too much? Like we'd looked at like bits and pieces of philosophers before, but we hadn't really studied logic or argument in the same way that we did there for sure. So I wouldn't really call it. I hadn't really done philosophy before that class seriously.
Yeah.
I
hadn't given it a proper treatment.
Yeah.
My history with it is pretty similar.
Yeah.
If a little more tangled, in part due to the nature of the discourse.
For sure.
In my family when I was growing up.
Yeah.
My mother, obviously, spends a huge amount of her life working on St. Augustine.
Right, yeah.
Who, apart from being a church father, was almost certainly a philosopher.
Definitely.
But I think that Abelard stretch of education definitely sort of imbued a bunch of those philosophical ideals in me. Do you know who Pierre Abelard is?
Yes, he is a philosopher.
Good answer.
But to be fair, I forget a lot of what he philosophized.
Me too.
Yeah.
Did you do any philosophy at university?
I did one class at university on moral philosophy.
What did you do? It's funny, I did a moral philosophy class.
Yeah,
too.
we covered
or an ethics class.
Ethics class. Yeah, we covered so we covered some basic stuff. Some of the same text we'd actually read in Mr. Blair's class. Leibniz, I think, Locke, Rousseau. But more we covered sort of topical issues, like abortion we did. I think we did, because the guy was pretty libertarian, we did affirmative action in that class. We debated that. And then we also debated, we did argumentation, logical argumentation, different terminology, rhetorical styles, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we did overlap with, it sounds like you were overlapping with politics.
Yes, definitely.
What do you remember from Brian Blair's class?
Brian Blair's class, I remember what was really cool was we did different types of sort of categories of philosophy, and we spent enough time on some big ones. We did epistemology, which was really cool. So the study of knowledge, how we know what we know. Talked about a priori reasoning. Do things come from our inner world and we know things just internally because that's who we are? Or is everything a posteriori? Does it all come from the outside and we pick up everything, externally? And people who kind of fell, different philosophers who fell on each side of that debate. And then I remember as well, we did moral philosophy, of course. We did Kant.
We did some ethics.
Yeah, did some ethics. We also did... I'm just trying to remember what else. We did logic. We did a little bit of logic. Yes,
yeah.
Not too much if I remember. But
just a touch.
Just a touch, yeah. Anything else you remember from that?
Yeah, a bunch of the same sort of stuff.
Yeah.
A couple more. I remember some chats, some conversations.
Yeah.
It was one of the things Brian did really well was sort of structure the class, but also give us room to go off and chat about the topic. And,
definitely.
And argue and try and philosophize.
Yeah, exactly.
As it were. Is there any of the philosophers you remember reading back then that stood out particularly to you or that you remember particularly well?
Yeah, Leibniz was really interesting. He did the best of all possible worlds. That was him. That we later read Candide by Voltaire, which is a parody and satire of that, which is also really, really funny.
Was that in philosophy class? Do you remember?
Yeah, we read Candide as extra credits. We didn't have to read it, but we got an extra credit assignment to read it and write about it. I think everyone did it.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah, I think everyone did it. Except maybe Oliver, I'm not sure. But maybe even Oliver did it.
That's funny. I forgot Oliver was in that class.
Yeah, Oliver was there, which is really funny. He might have actually done it too. Anyway, maybe.
Dispersed it somewhere. Oliver's like, you!
Exactly.
Nolan!
Oh, man. No, I'm sure we all did it. So.
Yeah, take that, Oliver.
I'm sure we all did it.
It's funny that there's a couple things that stand out to me for some reason that I remember particularly well.
Yeah.
I remember reading Nagel's essay about the bat.
The bat. It was really fun.
A couple other points.
Yeah.
I also did 3 philosophy courses in university.
Nice.
So we'll talk about university.
Yeah.
Before this series is up.
Yeah.
But there's a real downturn in my university career early on in second year.
For sure.
And while I am sort of struggling figuring out what the heck I'm supposed to do, but I'm still in school, I ended up taking 3 philosophy classes. An ethics course, a metaphysics course, and the last one I remember, I believe, got really messed up. So I remember it very vaguely. I think it was a philosophy of mind course.
Okay.
But we started with one professor, and then he just like disappeared halfway through and it was and he had been doing a really crap job before that. So, yeah. So I don't remember anything about that course really.
Totally, no.
I remember writing the only thing I remember about it was writing and reading something about death, which was very interesting. But I could also be wrong because there is some overlap between, of course, philosophy of mind,
yes,
and psychology,
right, absolutely.
Which was the major that I ended up in.
Absolutely.
So the memories could be blurring together a bit there.
Totally.
At some point, I should check the syllabus.
Yes.
Still have the list of courses there somewhere.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
But the ethics class was dire, truly terrible.
Oh.
Similar to yours, but worse taught. It was taught by an elderly, kind of unpleasant, ironically, for an ethics class, an elderly, unpleasant graduate student.
Ooh.
And again, most of it faded, but the metaphysics course was well taught. It was taught by a serious professor, who at one point was an acquaintance of another professor I knew quite well in classics, who was also just sort of intelligent and capable. Padre Go Cleric, wherever you are.
That's good, man. It's always good when your professors are intelligent and capable.
Oh, it is. Yeah,
That's nice.
Totally. And that metaphysics course covered a bunch of really, really fascinating material.
Nice.
It's quite similar in a way to a part of the project that I'm undertaking now, which is one of the reasons I'm bringing it up.
Yeah.
So we read, I'll try and do my best at the whole list, but we started with Plato, and then we read Aristotle.
Nice.
We read Spinoza. We read Heidegger and a little bit of Hegel, and I think there's another Platonist in there as well. But it was a really good selection, and I remember reading it. I remember sitting in class and just sort of having these floods of my own ideas and just sitting there going, well, this is really interesting, but it really makes me want to think about this. It really makes me want to write about that. And if you go back and look at my notes from the class, I'm taking notes of the course, of course, and then there's also I started shorthanding my own annotations where I would write G dash, and then I would write my own thought in.
Right.
And at a certain point, certain sections of the notes just get totally derailed. It's just me sort of thinking about
these ideas. That's cool, though, man.
So and it was I liked the course a lot, and it was a strong teacher.
Right.
But I think part of the reason it resonated really quite so clearly with me, and I loved Mr. Blair's philosophy class as well. I thought that was huge fun. But the reason it had resonated, that particular course had resonated so much about me, was because it was entirely focused on metaphysics and on the philosophical study of meaning, which has a word that but that has for some reason replaced itself with entomology in my head.
Oh,
which is incorrect, but K something.
Oh, for the philosophy of meaning?
Of knowledge.
Oh.
Philosophy of knowledge.
Epistemology?
Yes. Thank you.
No problem.
It doesn't have a K in it, but I don't know why entomology was down in there.
Because we were talking about Benton yesterday.
Totally. So that course was focused entirely on metaphysics and also on epistemology, because epistemology and metaphysics, if you think about it, are intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
Right. What do you like? How would you describe metaphysics?
Kind of like the stuff that we can't know for certain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and epistemology is the figuring out what we know.
Right.
So
yeah.
What we know and what we don't know are part and parcel with each other.
Exactly.
Closely tied to each other.
And that really tied into a train of thought that I had been developing on my own to sort of just rationalize certain aspects of the world.
Yeah.
And started out when I was a kid as just sort of musings on fiction. Because you read a lot when you were a boy, right? How did you sort of draw the line between what was happening in your books versus what was happening in the real world?
Oh, that's a good point. Well, I was just like, I always thought that the books were kind of cooler. To be totally fair, and be like, there's no dragons here, man. Damn it. Where are the aliens at?
Totally.
Yeah.
No, I'm in a very similar boat.
Yeah.
But in a way, that these things sort of served as a big question for me.
Yeah.
Was this line between, the real and the unreal,
right?
The fiction and the fact,
right?
And I was interested. I like reading a lot, and then I like you, I think as well. I was interested in science.
Yeah, exactly.
You from definitely more of an earth science perspective, I think. And I was interested in space and physics and and this stuff as well, black holes.
Definitely.
So that like two streams of learning about the world,
right?
Because on the one hand, you drawing the difference between what's in the pages of a book and your own physical experience is fairly easy, I think.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You sort of feel very different about the two topics. But if you're learning about the universe from the pages of a book, and then you're also reading Harry Potter.
Right. Yeah.
Now you're getting knowledge about something.
Right.
From both of these books.
Right.
And one of them professes to be real.
Right, and the other doesn't. Yeah.
And the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
Or does it?
Yeah.
Right. And if you remember, Harry Potter, I think, is a good example here, because it's about this sort of secret universe that's hidden behind what's really going on.
That's right.
You can make kind of a goofy reading of the Harry Potter books where it's like happening in the real world.
No, absolutely.
And certainly if you are 11.
Yeah, it could be.
And you're really waiting for that letter to show up.
Yeah, damn it, where was that?
To get you into Hogwarts.
Yeah, exactly.
You're 10 going on 11 and you're like, oh, please, now's the moment.
Come on, send me that letter, let's go.
It was like J.K. Rowling has a lot of angry parents on their 11-year-old birthdays to come after.
Especially when it was first coming out, definitely.
But you can see how, based on that sort of interpretation, there's a question there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the feeling that you're getting off of these things, all of a sudden, when you're thinking about black holes, about the scale of your solar system, when you're learning about other planets, these are things that in many ways are just as accessible to you as, the Diagon Alley, as Gringotts,
exactly,
as all these different Hogsmeade, all these different places in Harry Potter's kingdom.
Yeah, no, it's true, right? And the whole idea is you just have, adults mainly, telling you one is real, one is not real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this actually led me directly into one of my first things, one of my first major sort of misbeliefs about the world. Which was the thing that got you to being an adult was an understanding of reality. You were an adult when you could tell the difference between the things that were not real in Harry Potter and the things that were real in the book about the universe.
Right, exactly, yeah. That's really interesting.
So that was like a big illusion that I sort of ran with when I was a kid for several years.
It's like, at some point I'll get this, and then I will be an adult. No, totally.
Especially because behaviorally, it's very hard to tell the difference between kids and adults when you're a kid.
Yeah.
So that
they're just like really tall.
yeah, they're just like big. They're big kids who are weird in some way.
Yeah,
they're big kids who don't have much fun.
They like to talk.
It's not probably the most boring things.
I just want to go play, and they like to talk all the time.
They like to, and in the weirdest places too.
Yeah.
You know, you'll be walking around the grocery store, and then your mom will just stand there and talk to somebody for 45 minutes.
You just want to like get the hell out of there. Yeah.
Yeah, like why don't you guys just call each other?
Exactly. Adults, man.
It's that shared kid experience. It's
Definitely. Definitely.
So that train of thought led me to think about the world in these kind of two different ways.
Right.
That there were these things that were real and these things that weren't real.
Right.
And that one of the things that you did as you got older was you thought about them.
Right.
And you figured out how to actually put things into these two different places.
Right. Right.
So just sort of naturally as a result of that process, I did a fair amount of thinking about them and trying to put things into the different places.
Yeah.
And by the time I am, like life's been a pretty rocky road, as you know.
Yeah.
You know, my parents are splitting up in 2006.
Right.
This is
You're about 11 or 12 years old at that point. Probably 11, right? If it's 2006.
2006.
So I was 12.
12.
So, yeah.
12, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the exact same period that I'm thinking about this stuff and grappling with the world a bit better.
Absolutely.
The earliest sort of recollections I have of this start sort of around 8.
Yeah.
Before then, or I don't have writing, so I can't tell exactly when, but they certainly start sort of after 8 because I'm remembering being in a particular place in a particular house.
Thinking about something, yeah, exactly.
The very first seeds of this come from when I'm 6 years old.
Yeah.
And I probably told you this story at one point, but yeah, I am in school.
Right.
And I'm 6, and I suddenly realize that if you die, there could be nothing. So I freak out, and I'm bawling.
Yeah.
And the teachers do not understand.
Yeah.
Because it was like the end of the semester.
Right.
For a 6-year-old, and where everybody's literally just sitting on the floor and they wheel in the TV on the wobbly thing, and everybody's like watching Scooby-Doo movies.
Right.
And
you get this like, existential moment.
And then I'm just like a ghost. Life is suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I freak out and I bawl, and they're just like, we'll call his parents. We don't know how to calm this kid down. He's having an existential crisis.
Yeah.
We're terrified of death too, or we don't really understand what's going on.
Yeah.
I had great teachers at that point, so I imagine they're just like, ooh, this is
out
of our league.
let's get the big guns in here. Help Gabe out.
And that wasn't something that I'd ever done before.
Totally, yeah.
So, I don't think they... And it would be a bizarre point to be all like, I'm going to get out of this not class by throwing a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
And I remember getting home.
Yeah.
And my father telling me that, and he's struggling to figure out how to calm me down.
Yeah.
Like a sobbing 6-year-old, sobbing about the mystery of death.
Yeah.
And he tells me that these are really good questions, and they're things that my mother, who I was aware at that point worked on people who were been dead for like thousands of years,
right,
have been the people my mother studied have been working on,
right,
and that they hadn't figured out the solutions to these questions, but that there was this train of knowledge of people trying to figure it out. So that for whatever reason calmed me.
Yeah.
And that's the only other like real background piece,
right,
that goes into me thinking about the world and trying to figure out how it works. So that leads up really cleanly up to and through high school.
Right, yeah.
So that's sort of...
You move back to Canada when you're around 12 and you're really thinking about all this stuff, you know?
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of unpleasant stuff going on in life in general, and I'm having to get used to a bunch of stuff, and I'm spending a lot of time alone.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm just thinking about stuff, and I'm not really getting anywhere, but these sort of things, and trying to figure out how the world works, and how to fit in at school, and how to get these different parts of the puzzle together.
Yeah.
Like, this is all where it's things are sort of grinding around.
Yeah.
And when I get into Abelard, what I'm dealing with there is a remarkable environment.
Yeah.
Where I have this sort of peculiar perspective, this division in the world that I see before me. And I'm surrounded by, sort of intelligent and sort of just capable and overconfident little kids who are just about my age or slightly older.
Right.
And they're not all thinking about the exact same stuff, but they're thinking about lots of different fascinating things.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're engaging in conversations about it, and they're super willing to just talk and to argue and to engage.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of environment
that
I take these ideas into.
Right.
And go around, and they start to, at that point, they start to develop a bit more into an idea of sort of how to structure the world.
Yeah.
There are ramifications for splitting things into these two groups. If you can figure out what something is, then that tells you a bit about it.
Right.
So if you figure out something's real, then that can tell you something about its relationship to other real things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, yeah.
And the same thing applies if you figure out that it's not real.
Right.
And then through conversations with a number of people, there's at least one or two particular people, I don't get into the details, that really helped. I started to realize that that there were holes in what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
That I thought, because what I'd expanded it to was a classification of all things.
Yeah.
All things fall into either here or there.
Yeah.
But if all things fall into here or there,
right,
and you have this property and you treat them in the appropriate way, then it should make it very difficult for you to feel like those things are misplaced. And the more I talk to people, and the different people that I talk to, and people bringing me different arguments.
Right.
And this is where something like the Israel-Palestine argument comes into, because it was through one or two really big arguments about that with different people that I really started to get an idea of exactly sort of what was missing, and that there was something missing. That I hadn't managed to figure out where exactly every little thing fell.
Right.
I discovered that there was just sort of something wrong with this two-faceted view.
Yeah.
That it wasn't enough to just put everything into this one real box and everything into this one unreal box.
Unreal box,
And that shook me a little at the time. And then shook me a lot more in the early years of university.
Okay.
Where I start to really struggle, and I went there for theoretical physics.
Right.
The real.
Yeah, exactly.
And I ended up in psychology.
Right.
And had a lot of trouble along the way. And meanwhile, one of the things that kept me going was, being in a position where I wanted to figure out this problem that I was being faced with.
Yeah.
That, I had all these real problems in the world. There was stuff going wrong all around me. But I wanted to focus on my intellectual problem, on this issue about the way these different parts of the world fell together. Because in a way, that was an issue. I think that in a way that was an issue that was just safe. It was sort of a place where you can feel like you're working on something, but you're not dealing with any sort of emotional or all of the different difficulties that go around all the other different aspects of your life.
No, exactly.
Of having your relationships fall apart with people, having your grades fall apart.
It's a lot. You're moving on your own. You're on your own in a different place.
Totally.
It's a lot. Absolutely.
Feeling like you're disappointing people. Feeling like you're letting yourself down. a way to escape that was just to sort of focus on an intellectual problem of the interior.
Yeah, totally.
Something you think is worthwhile, but also that it doesn't matter if you fuck it up.
Yeah, and but the idea of safety of this being like an area that, you could really cover some groundwork.
Yeah.
Get somewhere by just thinking about this. I can understand that for sure. Definitely.
Thank you. Yeah. No, there's a big relationship in there as well that Owen Kaput and and it's one of the ones that you're never really sure if you recover from.
Yeah, no, absolutely, bro.
And all of that. And one of the worst things about those things is, and we're going to talk about relationships later.
Yeah, in our upcoming episodes. That's right.
Maybe without using names too much.
Yeah, we don't have to use names. That's
no, I don't think that's necessary. But one of the most terrible things about having a really important relationship to you fall apart is the feeling that you've done bad things, that you've made terrible mistakes, and there's no way to get around that at the end of the day, because you probably have.
Yeah, man, absolutely. It takes two to tango, always,
Yeah.
Always.
And it's hard to be in that position and have to deal with the stuff you feel like you've done.
Yeah.
So having this retreat that was challenging enough that it could totally absorb me.
Yeah.
And the place it really took off, I was doing this course in second semester.
Yeah.
I told you we're bringing it back around to
but absolutely
to the circle. So I'm in this metaphysics course, two other philosophy courses that aren't
thinking about all this going on,
Exactly. And that's part of the reason why these moments in that class are so productive.
Yeah.
Because they're giving me total sort of escape, but also an ability to engage with this fascinating material.
Yeah. Giving you lots of juice.
Exactly.
Lots of juice. Lots of fuel.
And in the midst of all that, my great Aunt Betty dies.
Right.
In literally 3/4 of the way through the semester, I'm doing the philosophy courses.
Yeah.
And I'm very shaken by that, in part just because I didn't think she was going to die.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I wasn't prepared for it. And for the living, when somebody dies, a lot of the time it's like that's a script of your life that you've written.
Yeah.
And can no longer edit.
Yep.
Because you end up catching yourself thinking about that person passing away and knowing that in some major way, like my great Aunt Betty, for reference, no kids.
Yeah.
No husband.
Yeah.
Was always there for me and my brother.
Right.
Traveled to England when we were kids.
Right.
There was at one point where I saw her more than I saw my English grandmother.
Wow. Yeah.
She was, and our family, apart from that, is on the Canadian side is very small.
Yeah.
It's my dad and us, me and my brother.
Right. Yeah.
So, there was a short list of people for her to be thinking about as she died.
Absolutely.
My father organized the funeral.
Wow.
And I showed up, and me and my brother both spoke.
Wow. Yeah.
And then a pleasant number of other people showed up too.
That's good.
But we were the family.
Yeah.
We were the people who were there.
Totally.
So when
this is going all on while you're studying this class.
While I'm thinking about all this stuff, and while I'm already trying to escape from all these other things that are going bad.
Absolutely.
And this really pushes me over the edge.
Yeah.
And I just kind of disappear into this work.
Yeah.
It's all I'm thinking about. It's almost all that I'm really doing.
Right.
I'm wandering around. I've got whiteboards set up. One of them's in the kitchen
nice.
now.
Yeah.
There's another one downstairs in that unpleasant apartment unpleasant house, I guess.
Rosie's house. Yeah.
No, this still wasn't Rosie's.
Oh,
this is still in
Guelph. Yeah.
In Guelph in second year, and I'm just sort of wandering around back and forth between these two things,
Yeah.
and I've got pads of paper on my bed,
Yeah.
and I'm working on stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure these things out, and I'm trying to, at that point, I've started to get an idea of what the third puzzle piece is.
Right.
But this time I'm working hard because I don't want to feel like I have many mistakes. Don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
Don't want to be wrong this time. So that's the period where these big questions to me start to seem to feel like they are having some answers.
Right.
To where I start developing my own sort of idea of how I feel like the world should really work.
Totally.
And start building and fleshing out a structure for how I see these different parts fitting together.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot. Absolutely.
Sorry.
You don't need to apologize. It's okay, man.
That's the whole...
Yeah, well, I hadn't heard the whole story of how you kind of developed these ideas and brought them in. I kind of got them after they were done.
Yeah.
Or maybe not done, but pretty near finished to where they are right now. So that's really cool.
Certainly certain sections of it seem pretty darn immutable at this point.
Yeah.
Basically all the stuff I've told you about is the stuff that I'm super confident in.
Right, yeah.
So what I ended up with was a framework.
Yeah.
Much more complicated than just one world, two world.
Right.
In some way, there's a section of it that looks just like three worlds. That looks like a division, 1,
right.
2, 3, without overlap.
Right.
And that has all the sort of explanatory power that I was excited about the two world system back when I was in high school.
Right.
So like either it goes in here or it goes in there, and I can tell the properties of it from where it goes.
Right.
Now that level of it has three things.
Right.
And either it goes there, or there.
Right.
And I can tell properties about it from where it goes. What is vastly different is sort of my understanding not only of how all of these things come to be, come to fit into the picture, but there are different sections of the model and sort of the why there would be a structure like this in the first place.
Right.
And this is where our talk about communication comes in. Because to me, what I am trying to probe, what I'm trying to figure out, is something that I often refer to as the limits of communication.
Okay.
The edges of things.
Sure, yeah. That makes sense, yeah.
With this idea that there has to be sort of points at which things are shared.
Yeah, people have the same understanding of different things, yeah.
Exactly. And if there are things of which things are shared between people's understandings, then maybe within that point somewhere there's also a thing that's shared between everybody's
understandings, yeah.
And maybe within that point there's a point that has to be shared.
Yeah.
That not just is, but has to be.
Mm-hmm.
And those things, I thought, would be really valuable.
Right.
Because if you could figure out what they were, you could build things out of them that would also have to be true.
Mm-hmm.
That would also have to apply.
Kind of like expanding circles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like you found in a way, it's kind of like you're blind.
Okay.
And you're trying to put a pin in something.
Yeah.
Right? You're trying to put a pin in something.
Yeah.
And if you manage to get a pin in something, you can hang your poster.
I see. Yeah.
You can find another place and you can hang your poster.
Hang your poster on. I see. Yeah. Connect these ideas together.
You get two ideas and then all of a sudden you can get a picture out of that.
Right.
And that process of trying to find that stuff, trying to figure it out, that's what I was doing in sort of second to third year.
Right.
I was getting the roughest structure together that I could.
Totally.
And slowly starting to refine certain aspects of it.
Totally.
So we've talked about things like systems and observation and categories and connections.
Yeah.
We've talked about the machine, the magic, and the metaphysics.
Right.
Those are the three things. We've talked about all these different pieces. We've talked about fundamentals.
Yeah.
Those are the places that you hang your pins. These different parts, what matters about them is how well they connect together and what they actually produce.
Right.
Right. And after I came up with a lot of this stuff, I sort of entered just kind of a laconic stage. There was a big question for me. The question was, I was basically grappling with fundamentals.
Yeah.
It took me ages just to figure out that was where I could hang the pin.
Right.
And then it took me much longer to figure out what the heck it was and why you could hang the pin.
Yeah, what was this thing? Yeah.
Yeah, what is this thing? Why does it seem to work?
It has to be shared by all these people.
Why how could that be the case?
Yeah.
How is that remotely possible?
Right.
And what a fundamental is answers that.
Right.
So I had to figure out what a fundamental was.
Right.
And that process was this big logical question, and I struggled and I struggled
Yeah.
and I struggled, and I finally felt like I'd gotten somewhere, and I'd solved it. And then I didn't know what to do next.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought so much of the time you're working on this stuff, it doesn't occur to you that it's not enough just to have an idea.
Right.
You have to tell people the idea too.
Yeah.
So this is where I think it's good to bring you in. Tell me what some of your conversations with me were like when I first tried to talk to you about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, to be perfectly honest, when we were first talking about it, we were both fairly intoxicated. So that's my first introduction to it.
It's the easiest way to bring it up.
Yeah, exactly. So
let me say about the universe.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've been sipping on something, and then you talk to me and you're like, okay, I think I had said something about Jordan Peterson, and you're like, oh boy, I gotta talk to Nolan.
I fucking hate that guy.
I didn't like him either.
I know, I knew you wouldn't.
But it was just like, oh my, I think for you that triggered like, here's somebody who's throwing, half truths and straight out lies and packaging them as, rarefied academic discourse, and you're like, okay, Nolan, I want to show you something. And I remember sitting there, and you had written something on fundamental logic. I think this was about the machine magic and the metaphysics. So I was reading this, and it seemed interesting about, figuring out how to put different pieces of reality together. I don't think I got very far at that time, to be fair. I think this was a very kind of new way of looking at the world for me. So I got bits and pieces of it.
Not my best writing.
But it's also like, it's hard stuff too,
Yeah,
to kind of think about. And then I think what we talked about was we went into I remember we were on the swings here because we carried on these conversations. We were still like imbibing at that time, so we'd go out for walks and smoke or drink and talk about this stuff for hours sometimes. Man, it was cool, aside from the substance part of it. But I remember we were on the swings and I was talking to you and you're working me through perspective and how when you see the world, there are things that are like each other, or the sameness, the idea of sameness, and then the idea of difference. And then the third thing, you're like, but there's something else, Nolan. And I'm like, okay, what is it? And then I say, oh yeah, it's things that are different and the same at the same time. They're simultaneously have the qualities of sameness and difference.
Right.
And then out of that, it was like, okay, so we got the metaphysics over here, we got the machine here, and then we got the magic in the middle.
Exactly.
Things that we can understand, things that we can't understand, and then things that we can kind of know about but not fully, that occupy that third territory. So that's kind of, that I remember was that was kind of the big sort of moment for me, was like, okay, I'm picking up what Gabe's putting down.
Yeah, you can sort of see how the pieces, all of a sudden the things start to make sense.
Yes, things started kind of locking into place. Yeah.
I always found the same sort of thing as I think you were experiencing, where whenever I just tried to find something new in what I call fundamental logic,
right,
it was hard to make sense of it until I could see how it fit in with other things.
Right. Yeah.
You kind of had to grasp like more than one thing at the same time, or you wouldn't get it at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
and that is makes sort of a weird challenge.
Totally.
I know perspective is really important.
Yeah.
Both in general terms and also in terms of logic itself.
Logic, yeah, the perspective logic, yeah.
Because without so much of what people do.
Right.
And obviously, I'm not going to bother to go hard into any of this. But when people are trying to figure things out,
Yeah.
they're doing it from a background of a certain amount of knowledge.
Right.
And they're doing it in a certain way.
Right.
And they're doing it with other people's ideas.
Right.
But they can't sit down and draw a circle around each of these groups.
No.
They can't go, this is where that is, and this is where that is, and this is where that is.
Yeah.
So what perspective does is, if you're using it properly, it kind of allows you to roughly mark these boundaries.
Right.
And then as necessary,
Yeah.
you can fill in the details when they become important.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
And it has to be doable.
Right.
Because otherwise we wouldn't be able to communicate anything ever.
Right. Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to tell you where things are or what they do.
Right.
There's all sorts of ways in which we interact with the world and get all sorts of things done.
Yeah.
And then there's all sorts of ways in which we sit down and have conversations and the other person's just there like, like I have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's probably just about all we really need to say about logic itself. I'll touch quickly on this project.
Yeah.
So as introduction,
So let's bring it here. You've got these ideas about the world. You've been, last 2 years or so, you've been talking to me about them.
Yes.
Talking to Janine about them.
Oh, it's been a huge help.
Absolutely. But then you kind of came to this realization a couple months ago, not too long ago.
Yeah, basically the end of last year.
Yeah, 3 months ago-ish. And I remember you just talking to me about it, that you wanted to do a thesis on this, or a big project on this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the trick was I've been trying to wrap my head for years around how do I communicate this to people.
Right.
How do I do it?
Yeah.
And my first thought was to try and get it across to people like you.
Yeah.
Smart, involved, capable. But it's hard.
Yeah.
And it's long. And it's slow. And I'm not very good at explaining it.
It's hard stuff, yeah.
And it occurred to me that what I needed was to tap into pre-existing ways of looking at the world.
Right.
Pre-existing knowledge.
Right.
And produce a document that would make sense to those people.
Yeah.
And hopefully, by all means, of course, hopefully to you as
well.
well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. I want you to read the thing.
Definitely, I want to read it.
Assuming I managed to finish it.
Absolutely.
But that was what finally made it click for me. And I've tried to talk to other people about it every now and then. It's hard for me to introduce it, hard for me to talk about. It makes me sound like a lunatic half the time. So I don't go into it that much.
It's not exactly an easy icebreaker, you know what I mean? Yeah. Hey, let's talk about...
Let's talk about the limits of communication.
Definitely. And it's kind of tough because, it's... now that we're both out of school, you sort of realize... intellectual conversations are not always just around the corner in the same way that they were, It's tough to find people who actually want to talk to you about this stuff.
Totally.
And, that's unfortunate, but that's how it is, I think we were both brought up in academic households that really valued these kind of conversations, but, a lot of people can't or don't.
And then I had a lot of good school experiences.
Had a lot of good school experience, exactly. Yeah. And, had parents we could talk to about ideas like this,
Totally.
I just think, that tradition is really important, but it definitely isn't ubiquitous, Like
totally.
a lot of people don't know how to engage with kind of these really sort of complex ways of thinking about the world,
Yeah, I feel you.
And then, that's not their fault. They're not a marker of their intelligence. It's just familiarity,
Yeah, getting used to thinking about different things.
Yeah.
And sort of just letting things that you might not think are that important pan out and hold your attention.
Totally.
Honestly.
Absolutely.
It's funny how much a part that often is of it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one of the reasons I think that academics are such a weird bunch. Because they really have this ability to sit down and sort of give a topic a high level of due diligence.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And sometimes that results in a couple of loony ideas slipping in along the way. So I realized that, speaking of loony ideas, that academics would be the most prepared.
Definitely.
To sort of read a long, complicated piece of work.
Yeah.
But But big buts. You got to pay your diligence.
Yeah.
You got to do it right.
Yeah.
I know a bit about writing a thesis.
Right.
It's the reason why I'm referring to it as a thesis, because the model is a graduate thesis.
Right.
Because it's a really clear model, and academics are very, very used to reading them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So by taking that as a model, and one of the most important parts to it is doing the research.
Yeah.
Whatever you are doing,
Right.
whether it is in sciences or the humanities,
Right.
a huge part of your thesis is always going to be presenting information that other people have figured out before you,
Right.
in order to then show where your piece fits into the puzzle.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So that's the stage I'm in right now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing on my thesis. I am trying to learn as much as I can about these different parts
Right.
that I think should be most applicable to the structure that I...
Totally.
And really it's just picking out the threads of knowledge throughout history
Yeah.
that I think have built up a language that is close enough to what I think I'm thinking about,
Right.
that I can make the leap as short as possible.
Right.
And I'm finding that place mostly in what is arguably the two oldest branches of human knowledge, in philosophy and mathematics.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to work on.
Yeah. Word. Absolutely.
And I'm by no means the best mathematician, but hopefully I've minored in math.
Right. Yeah, you've got some chops, man. Absolutely.
Got a bit of a background,
Yeah.
and hopefully what I lack as a mathematician, I will be able to make up for in terms of how much I can read and the amount I can engage with philosophical ideas,
Yeah.
and my ability to understand and interpret them accurately.
Right.
Because while mathematicians might not like to admit it, some of the time there's a lot of philosophy in math.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Especially from a historical
Definitely.
perspective.
Definitely.
So that's the project.
That's where you're at right now. That's great.
I'm trying to research this thing. I'm trying to write my own stuff at the same time.
Nice.
Trying to mix it all together and produce a document
Right.
that explains my ideas to people, that does due diligence to an academic tradition, so that people are actually inclined to read the thing.
Right.
And then hopefully people will read it.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
And I'm also just loving the opportunity to sit down and learn and to read and
Yeah.
to touch on all these just incredibly cool things.
Yeah, it's good. It's like you're back in school again, you know.
Exactly.
But taking
That's
classes you all want to take, you know. Only professors yourself, sort of thing.
Yeah, I
you give
choose-
yourself your own grades, you know. It's kind of cool, man.
Yeah.
It's a good time to be doing it though too. I mean, you know, it's not exactly easiest to kind of it's a good time to do that kind of self-reflective writing project, you know. It's
Totally.
not, you know, it's winter, it's COVID-19, all this stuff is available online, you know.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome, and you're just able to kind of set your own schedule and do it and chip away at it. So I think it's great, man.
Thank you, buddy.
And I think I know you'll get there, man.
Cheers.
It might be a bit of a ride, but that's part of the fun, you know. Even if it takes you a couple years or however long it
I
takes you,
imagine so,
you know,
yeah.
that's gonna be great.
Thank you, man.
And absolutely. So, I guess yeah. So we've talked about kind of where the project's at. I can ask you the question of where do you want to be in a couple years with it? I think I'll know the answer. But
Yeah, it's the perfect place to wrap up for this one.
Yeah.
I'm super happy to be having this opportunity to try it out.
Yeah, man.
I think it's always felt like there's so much to me in these ideas. The more I think about it, the more I have to sort of flesh out between these places that I felt I'd figured out really
Definitely.
well. There's also some, there's still a hope that, in a way, that it could all just be wrong.
Yeah.
That I find this little, that I find an error, that I go back through my reasoning and I go, well, I was nuts back then. I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Wrecked by grief or something else,
Totally.
And that in a way would be just as good.
Yeah.
Because it would be a shame not to have produced a beautiful piece of work that presents my brilliant ideas to the world.
Right.
But it would also be remarkable to have a world that I now feel really secure in.
Yeah.
Sort of ruptured, and the different parts of it sort of unveiled.
And you have to figure things out again.
Exactly.
Yeah, piece it all together. Okay, so
yeah.
whatever the outcome is, you're kind of excited.
Either I end up back in the loop of creating and destroying,
Right.
of trying to figure out new answers
Yeah.
to the same old problems, or I manage to produce a document that explains really well this set of ideas that I think is super valuable.
Or maybe you're in the magic and you have to do a bit of both.
Maybe that's the case.
Maybe that's it too. That's always a possibility too.
Of course.
All right, so
All right, buddy. Love you. Thanks so much for
problem.
talking
Thank
to
you,
me
man.
about this one.
Absolutely, man. And I hope to read it. I definitely will read
I
it
hope
when it's
you read
ready.
it too,
When
yeah.
it's ready, I definitely will read it.
That would make at least one other person.
Hey, yeah, man. All right.
Well, thank you so much for doing that one.
Yeah, no problem, man. I think that was a good one. That was kind of cool. I hadn't heard the whole story of how you came up with it, you know?
Thank you.
So
Yeah,
that was fun.
I hope that fits in. Just sort of